We did it. So good evening. So Major Frank DeBrose is still working through a login issue with Teams. So he is on and will hopefully be joining us as a presenter shortly. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Ed Boss. We have Major Zavatakis with us. Say hi, Mike.
Hello, I'm sorry. Good evening.
And this is week 2 of the Emergency Services Officer Workshop. And so the topics that we're going to cover tonight are relationship management, so getting out and talking to people in the community as an ES officer, tools and resources, specifically looking at a lot of online systems that you have access to, and then we're going to talk a little bit about training and how training works. So, Z, can you look at the Q&A and see if there are any questions so far that anyone has?
Right now, we look pretty good.
Okay. Like I said, there's that Q&A feature. Go ahead and type your questions in there, and we will do our best to monitor it. And before we wrap up tonight, we'll go through and make sure we answer as many as we can. So relationship management. So fundamentals about it. First, you have to plan your relationship management. And we talked about that when we talked about annual planning. You have to make sure that you are thinking about who you're going to engage with, what community partners there are in your area, who you can build relationships with that will make our mission better. This is about emergency services specifically. So what organizations, primary search and rescue and disaster relief organizations, can you work with? Groups like Team Rubicon is a disaster relief organization. The local SAR team is a search and rescue organization that primarily do those functions. That's why they were organized. Secondary search and rescue organizations like the Salvation Army, they have food trucks they can bring to an incident and help provide meals for your incident-based staff, right? That would be a secondary search and rescue and disaster relief organization. And customers. And so we want to reach out and talk to people with local, county, state, regional, federal governments. And we have regional governments here in the Portland metro area called Metro. That's what I'm referring to there. But we want to talk to these people and let them know that CEP exists. It has capacity and capabilities. It is a great value for the taxpayer. And we have trained volunteers that are ready to help. So what we're going to do is we're going to have an approach. We're going to have an upfront contract. We're going to talk about pain points, and that's not the best way to discuss it, but it makes sense from a sales and prospecting point of view. Leveraging networks and follow-up, right? But a point that I need to make is this. The effective range of an ICBM is 5,500 kilometers. The effective range of a trebuchet is 300 meters. The effective range of a super soaker is 11.5 meters. And your max effective range is in that 1 meter circle. As an ES officer, you need to get up front, out in the community, talking to people face to face. That is the important thing to do when we talk about relationships. It's not enough to send an email and say you did it. You actually have to get out and talk to people. So your initial approach matters. It matters that you reach out by phone, by email, or in person to start a conversation and start building this relationship. And in that initial approach, you need to be knowledgeable. You need to know what you're talking about. You need to be warm and professional. You can't be stilted. You can't be standing at parade rest in somebody's office. You need to be polished in manner and appearance. Wearing a uniform is great. That isn't appropriate everywhere, but maybe you want to consider it. And one of the most important things you can do is listen more than you speak. The worst thing you can do is go and just word vomit in someone's office and tell them all about CAP and everything they need to know and how we got found in World War II and how we sunk submarines. Listen to what the customer's needs are, what the search and rescue organization does, what that disaster relief organization has experience with, and then figure out how to build a relationship from there. So when you're in a meeting, you can have an upfront contract. And I will actually just put a link to this up on the Girdwood website. We won't watch it right now. Mostly, I'm afraid that Teams will mess up the link. But what it is when you go into a meeting, you say, hey, so I'm here to talk to you about this today. I'm here to talk to you about the Civil Air Patrol today. And at the end of the day, I just want to make sure that we can both agree that we can either decide that, yeah, it's worth having a follow-up conversation and figuring out if there's something that we can do together, our two organizations, or if it's not. And that way we both know where we stand at the end of the day. Is that okay? It's quick, it's professional, and it prevents ambiguity. And we don't have to put on a lot of pressure. We don't have to say we have to sign an MOU right now. That needs to happen today. It's we need to decide whether or not we can move forward at all or not. Pain points. And really quick, back to upfront contracts. The example video is only a few minutes long, and if you have a chance, go watch it. It's from the Sandler sales training system. I was trained in that when I was doing some nonprofit work, and it's a really good way of saving time. Really, at the end of the day, it's about saving your time and their time. So really, if you have a chance, go watch it. So pain points. Solving problems is what CAP is here to do, right? We are here to solve the problem of how do we turn young people into motivated leaders? How do we build aviation expertise in our community? How do we provide support for the community in emergencies and disasters? Those are the pain points in the community that we're here to solve. We want to find out what the pain points are for other organizations. Maybe they have a need for communication support. Maybe they have a need for aerial photography. Maybe they have a need to do some joint training, combined training. Figure out what their pain points are, and then solve it. When you walk into a meeting, ask someone what they know about CAP, and remember what they say, because you want to support their pre-existing notions so that when you have that further conversation about what CAP is, or guide them to some new information, it fits into what they already know. It makes the conversation a little bit more comfortable for everyone. Ask them, identify what they're hoping to learn or hoping to accomplish by having a meeting with you. So why did you agree to meet with me today? And if they say, well, I don't know, well, that doesn't do you a lot of good. But it's a place to start and find out what they need and how you can help fix their problem, even if they don't know they have one. Asking for permission is very helpful. When you're sitting and having a conversation with someone and they say, oh, well, you know, we have this thing where we don't have anybody to park cars at our monthly search and rescue exercises. Oh, would it be okay with you if we talked a little bit about how we could solve that? Oh, we have cadets that love volunteering and doing community service. You know, that might be something that we can do to help you. Things like that. Asking that question, would it be okay with you if, is also very helpful. Use questions, probe politely, and guide the conversation to learn more about them and their needs. And if it's appropriate, offer a solution. Again, we are trying to build rapport, build a relationship. We don't have to tell them what to do. We're going to offer a solution.
Ed, there is a question here. Do we have MOUs with the Salvation Army, etc.? I'll go ahead.
No, go for it. You got it.
So there are some national level MOUs or just agreements with some American Red Cross, for example. National headquarters does have an MOU with the National Red Cross. They also have it with FEMA and some other organizations. Excuse me. So there are also some more local level MOUs. MOUs, though, have to be approved and go up through the chain of command. So a squadron cannot go into an agreement with a county, Salvation Army unit or Red Cross unit just on their own. So you have to remember that there is a procedure for establishing MOUs. And if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
No, that's it. MOUs are a pretty big deal. They're a pretty substantial contract, and you don't always need them. Some people think they need them. You don't always. Be sure to discuss it with your general counsel and your wing legal officer if you decide to move forward with one of those. The close. So I think of this relationship building as a sales call. I think of it as in terms of sales, and we close sales. We close that deal, right? And so whatever your proposed solution is, involving your cadets, providing aircraft support, disaster relief, communications, whatever it is, if it makes sense with that partner organization or that customer, then let them know, hey, we can follow up and plan on our next meeting where we can dig into this and dial in what details we're going to do or how we're going to work together moving into the future. Have those steps ready ahead of time. Be ready when you walk in to actually come to a conclusion and have a follow-up plan. Have a follow-up date prepared. Have the next steps for who you're going to pull in, if it's a comm person, if it's your disaster relief officer, if it's your wing director of operations. Know who you're going to rope in ahead of time. The Apple Store doesn't freeze at the end of an interaction. You go in there to buy a phone, buy a computer, or you just go in to look around and you aren't sure what you want. Well, at the end of that interaction, that salesperson is going to be ready to sell you what you want and sell you what you need. And when you go and talk to a potential customer, you need to be ready to make that sale as well. Even though we're not exchanging money, you can think about it in those terms. They're also totally okay with you walking out and not buying anything. Again, we're talking about the Apple Store. And the power in that is we're not desperate for every small town, every community to have some sort of agreement moving forward working with CAP. We want to help get the word out about CAP. We want people to be aware of us. We do want to work with partners where it's appropriate, but we're not desperate to build 100 different relationships that we have to maintain throughout the year if it's not going to be fruitful. It's not good for both parties. So bottom line, be ready to close the deal, but don't force it. All right, so leveraging networks. And what I mean by that is it's the do you want fries with that? It's the follow-up to the rest of the interaction that you've had. So you've had a successful interaction. Either they want to use CAP or they don't, right? That's success. Either way, that's success. I'll think about it is not a good outcome, right? I'll think about it means you broke that upfront contract and that now you're wasting time dancing around. Okay, maybe I can go back to them and maybe we'll do something in the future. But, that uncertainty doesn't do you any favors. But the question you need to ask at the end of that interaction is, who else should we speak with? Is there another community partner? Is there another organization that does something similar around here that we can talk to? It helps keep your tank full. And by tank, I mean pool of resources, pool of other organizations that you can work with. All right, wrapping up and following up. So end those interactions on a positive note. We're so excited that you're going to come out and check out our SARX or whatever it is, however you want to move forward together. Keep doors open, don't burn bridges. If someone doesn't want to partner with you, that's okay, right? Hey, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you letting me come talk to you about Civil Air Patrol. And that's enough. No reason to sour a relationship before you even have a chance to really get one going. When it's appropriate, send a thank you card. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me. The Civil Air Patrol meets on Tuesday nights if you ever want to come check us out. Something like that. Or if you are going to move forward and have some sort of partnership, send a follow-up email or a calendar reminder on what those next steps are so that everyone is very clear on what you're doing moving forward. We know there might be some ambiguity. We know there might be times where you break that upfront contract. And so what you want to do is track your leads, all right? Track your potential relationships, those prospects, track how you've interacted with them. Spoke to this person on this day, here was the outcome. Spoke to this person on this day, unclear on what we're going to do together. They said call back in a few months. And then set a reminder for yourself a few months from now to call back. And if someone says don't call me again, Make sure you take note of that so we don't call them again. CAP doesn't need to be getting in the business of harassing people. We want to avoid that. Now, some other things. All this stuff talking about sales calls and sales and the upfront contract, that's really talking about how you're initiating a relationship, how you're getting it off the ground, because that's the biggest problem that a lot of squadrons that I've seen have is they just don't know to go out in the community and talk to people. But once you've got that relationship started, you have to maintain it. You have to touch base a couple times a year. You have to keep taking notes on who you talk to and who the players in these different roles are in your community. When you do that, communicate naturally. Be cool, be normal. Don't be weird. Don't make CAP look weird. Don't be super formal and over the top. Just be normal. And remember, and we're going to talk about this several times, under promise and over deliver. Our personnel or volunteers, if you say that we will definitely come to every one of your exercises and provide 2 ground teams and 3 air crews and have a comm truck there and do that every time, 6 times a year, and then we aren't able to provide that level of support, that organization is never going to work with us again. And other organizations that they talk to will come to learn that CAP is unreliable. One bad experience can ruin years of positive interactions. And I've seen that firsthand. I've seen where, when I was in the Massachusetts wing, there was very good working relationships with search and rescue groups in the community. And then a couple of bad actors, a couple of people that weren't as proficient, that weren't under promising, really gave CAP a black eye by not doing their job right. So be aware of that.
And let me interrupt here for a second.
Yeah.
We had a question come in. It's a little lengthy, but it's important, I think. So I'm very happy to meet with local organizations and make connections with CAP. But this training seems odd. To me, I would have thought that CAP has already covered all the bases in each wing. So why are we being given such training and being encouraged to make local contacts? Do we CAP really want dozens of CAP members flooding the locality selling CAP? How do we avoid multiple CAP members in the same area contacting the same organizations and thereby annoying said organizations? So this is the piece last week where it was very important that all ES officers are communicating with each other. So for example, in Maryland, for the most part, squadrons are in different counties. So each county has a squadron. There's a couple of cases where there's more than one squadron in the same county. So it would be very important for those 2 squadrons to talk to each other to make sure if they go to that county's emergency operations center, that they do that together and in coordination with each other. Excuse me. In different states, things are laid out differently. The organizations may not be aligned geographically the same way that CAP is. So then it becomes important that, again, within CAP, we're talking to each other, that you're talking to the other ES officers within your general area, and you say, hey, I was looking at going to the Salvation Army for the Eastern Shore of Maryland. Well, that's many counties, so all of those squadrons should work together in representing Civil Air Patrol to a local Salvation Army unit. So this is where that communication within CAP is very important. And then even going up to your region or state, or your region, if you're set up in groups, or your wing, to find out, hey, is anyone contacted? We've learned about this organization. Has anybody in the wing contacted these people? We're willing to do this for you. The communication cannot be overstressed, and certainly within Civil Air Patrol. And I know today, with the current COVID situation, it makes that difficult to go out and have that face-to-face handshake meeting. But the relationships that even currently, if you have to do it over the phone, are very important. And if things loosen up and you're able to go out and meet and say just a lunch date or a lunch meeting or something like that, That face-to-face meeting, I have found in my experience, is invaluable. It is extremely important. I hope that answers your question.
And that was really good, Z. But I think one other aspect of that they directly answered: do we want CAP members from all different squadrons going out and talking to people in the community? Yes, yes, absolutely. It is in your job description. There is one national director of operations. There are 8 region directors of operations. There are 50 wing directors of operations. And ops and ES staffs underneath all of them. But CAP is still a secret because we don't have those 59 people able to talk to everyone. And so it's important that local units can talk to their county counterparts, can talk to their local municipal, organizations and talk about CAP. That is absolutely vital that we do that. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? Otherwise, CAP remains the best kept secret in the world, right? And we don't want that. Right, Z?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get through the questions here. I just published another one. I published 2 more. Let me go back over to the published section. So the first, recommend that ES officers coordinate. We just talked about that, and also with higher headquarters. Make sure that we don't step on each other. I think that we pretty much just covered. Is there a list at each wing level of organizations that have been contacted already? If not, this would be a very good idea, which would help facilitate. So every wing is different. Some wings do a better job at that than others. Again, if you're not sure, using your chain of command, if you're a squadron ES officer and your wing has groups, check with the group ES officer up to the wing ES officer and ask that question. Find out if they have been maintaining that list. My experience is most group and wing ES officers are overwhelmed with doing the training plans and organizing search and rescue exercises, not to mention real world stuff. And some of these things, like trying to maintain a list of the last time they contacted the Salvation Army, kind of falls through the cracks. So reach out, and a lot of times they are very willing to accept your help. Say, oh, you know what, we forgot about that unit, and let's go out there and talk to them.
Awesome. Any other questions before we move on? Okay.
I think we're good for now.
Awesome. So let's talk about some tools. Specifically, e-services and WIMRs are usually the first things that come up. And in e-services, as emergency services officers, and it always confuses me why we have an emergency services mission and an e-services tool suite, but that's, I didn't make that decision. So operations tools, commander's dashboard, and reports are things that you want to be familiar with. You may not have access to the commander's dashboard, but there's some pretty good information on there that you can take a look at and work with your leadership to see. And then WIMRs, the Web Mission Information Reporting System, really is designed so that the people who manage our money, specifically the Air Force, can see what we're doing with our assets, specifically airplanes, and what we're doing with the money. And they want to be able to see that reported real-time-ish, and that's really why WIMRs was developed. And it also builds a common operating picture. And so we can go into WIMRs and see, okay, where do we have missions going on? What sorties do we have up in the air right now? Things like that. It's not a very good common operating picture tool, but it does a little bit of that. So let's look. I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint presentation. And I'm going to try to share. All right. See, quick, stall. I got logged out.
Oh, I'm sorry. So there was a quick question here about a new person. You didn't have any idea we could contact other organizations or outside organizations. So when I started back in the year 2000, I joined because my son and daughter were cadets in the program, and they said, "Dad, come on, ES is just like going camping." That's how they sucked me in. So at that point, ES was new to me from the outside of CAP, inside in all capacity, and at least in Maryland, we were very siloed. So CAP dealt with CAP, and we did not work with outside organizations. That has changed, but that took a lot of work. As I became the Wing ES officer, I reached out to the state police and to the Red Cross and the Salvation Army and the local non-governmental organizations. There's about 10 NGO SAR teams in the Mid-Atlantic region. So I reached out to all of those and have worked with them in their training exercises and invited them to our training exercises. But that did take a lot of work, a lot of phone calls, going out, and meeting people and shaking hands and working those relationships. So yes, we definitely want to get out there. As the Colonel said just minutes ago, it's actually our job title to get out there and be that face of Civil Air Patrol and the Emergency Services Program.
Thanks, sir. Can you see my e-services screen?
I certainly can.
Okay. Well, let's hope everybody else can. So here we are on the main page of e-services. If you go to the menu, all right, first thing I will show people is the commander's dashboard, because not everyone has had a chance to see that. And this is an application that leadership has access to. And you can look at your entire wing, or you can look at individual units. So right now we're going to look at the Oregon wing. And I want to see the operations dashboard, operations metrics. And this is going to be what your leadership is looking at when we build our annual plan. And so aircraft utilization based on all aircraft in the wing is, 36.99%. Mission pilots per aircraft. And so if we have less than one mission check pilots rather, if we have less than one mission check pilot per aircraft, maybe we want to focus on that in our training plan. Same thing with VFR pilots. We only have 3 pilots per aircraft, 2 mission pilots per aircraft. Well, if we have a multi-week operation going on, let's say it's a big disaster, we want to make sure we have air crews, we want to make sure we have multiple air crews per day, we're going to need more pilots. So all these metrics are available. Same thing for mission-based staff, like incident commanders or incident management teams. Sorry, is the new preferred nomenclature. Ground team leaders, mission chaplains, ORIDE pilots, instructor pilots. So all these things on this commander's dashboard for operations can help you build the picture so you know what you need to work on for your annual planning. Does that make sense? I think it does. So back to the main page, operations. Now we have a variety of tools here. Where do I start is not really useful. Aircraft ground handling training, people should take that, it's good stuff. Capabilities is actually pretty informational and useful if we go and we are going to go and talk to people in the community. We can email them this ahead of time or print it and bring it with us. But this capabilities handbook brochure actually has information, facts that emergency managers, planners, elected officials, potential partners, information that they can use to make a decision. And so it's not a very long document. But there it is. Yes, sir.
So can I hold you up for a second? 2 questions. One, kind of what we were talking about previously, how important is it to train with outside organizations? It's very important, because you don't want to, for the first time ever, be called out on a mission where, say, the state has called and said, we need CAP ground teams to help in this missing person search. You don't want that to be the first time you've ever worked with these people. You want that to be the 50th time that you've worked with these people. And again, you pull up, I cannot stress how important this is. When I pull up on a mission that's not initiated by CAP but by the state, and I see people that I know, I feel much more relaxed and comfortable than when I pull up on a mission and I'm looking around and I don't know a single person there. As well as, I get out of the vehicle and half the time they come over and shake my hand and say, "Oh, glad you're here." It's extremely important that you go out and work with the other organizations. And the second question, finding out about gaining access to the commander's dashboard. I think that your best bet as an ES officer is to just go to your wing or squadron commander and say, "Hey, can we look at this together?" Because there are different features in e-services are available or are assigned by duty assignment. So the easiest is probably just to go to your squadron commander and say, "Hey, can we sit down and look at this and see where we stand and what we need to work on?"
Yes, sir. That's great. One feature that I want to point out in the capabilities handbook is something that is new and exciting and baffling to even some unit and group commanders I've met. And that is the decision tree, tasking decision tree. So for local, state, or federal agencies, how do we get access to CAP support? So for state and local, this is the process. A representative from the organization contacts the NOC. The NOC does their thing, all right, makes a decision, says yes or no. Will the Air Force support it? Yes or no? And so it's a very straightforward process if you know what it is. And if you don't know what it is, it's printed out so we can look at it. But I've been talking to wing staff, I've been talking to group commanders, and they're like, "Oh my God, how do I tell this, county official how to get CAP support?" Well, it's written down in this book for you. Right. So that is one feature that I like about that a lot. Back to e-services. Nope.
There's a quick question here. Would the public affairs be able to have contacts needed to reach local groups? I would not. It doesn't hurt to ask, but they're basically, if you think about public affairs, they look, for the most part, they look to membership for stories to get out to, so that we're visible and outside of CAP as well as inside. So they're not necessarily going out to organizations saying, "Hey, have you ever heard of us?" They kind of work backwards for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So ops quals, most people have seen. We'll come back to that in a minute. The training plan, a lot of people probably have not seen. But the 2020 Oregon training plan, right? So here are the different areas that the wing has to consider and that get approved by the wing, by the region, and by the CAP-USAF liaison region. And so the commander has a statement about commander's intent. The good staff officers write this for their commander and let their commander edit it. You don't need your commander to sit down and do all the work, right? Requirements. So requirements for Oregon. This can come from higher headquarters or it can be self-generated. I think this right here is self-generated. Goals, objectives, and tasks. And so we have national goals, objectives, and tasks like we talked about last week. We talked about that annual planning using those national objectives. Here are region goals, objectives, and tasks. And this has been given to the wing, so the wing can keep that in mind. SUI planning. So like I said, WMERS is for tracking money to a pretty high degree. And so because the SUIs, the transportation for the SUIs is programmed out of an Air Force monitored budget, it gets tracked in WMERS. And then the flying, so proficiency flying, orientation flights, ROTC flights, flight evaluations, and the training budget. And so we can look and see, here is the type of training being conducted, what the name of it is, the dates, who is going to be involved. So here in Oregon, we just get all of our squadrons involved simultaneously because it's a pretty small wing. Objectives. This is out of that national and region objective list. What objectives are we supporting with this training? How much is it going to cost? And then all that gets looked at by the approval authorities. There you go. Let's go back. Any questions about that in the chat?
Nope.
Great.
Oh, who can see the training plans? I'm sorry.
That's a good question. I have a feeling more people than they realize.
Yeah, I don't know exactly who. Again, National has, when you're assigned duty assignments, they have a, if you're a, like for example, myself, I'm one of the wing ES officers, so I can see it, but to be honest with you, I'm not sure exactly what level they cut that off.
Yeah, you can check with your WSA and see. If you're at the unit level, you generally don't need to see the training plan, but whatever you plan at the unit level that you want to have funded needs to go up to the wing in time to be included in it. And so like we talked about, your annual planning needs to get done early enough that it can roll up into the wing's plans. Let's look at ops quals briefly. Most people are pretty familiar with this, but a couple of things that I want to talk about. So there are ops quals reports that are available. Specific mission qualifications, if you're looking for a specific skills evaluator, things like that, that's pretty useful. Counter drug, not a whole lot of wings are doing a lot of counter drug right now. I don't know that I've ever messed with that actually.
Yeah, we're a little bit in, this is a terrible thing to say, but competition with the National Guard on counter drug. Yeah. So a lot of wings counter drug is conducted by the National Guard.
Yeah.
Hey, that guy looks familiar.
He sure does. And so Major Zapatakis is a powerful man with lots of credentials. I brought him up to point out that Major Zapatakis isn't in my wing or even my region, but I can look up his operations qualifications. Anybody can look up anybody's operations qualifications. And the reason for that is anybody might be a mission staff assistant helping check people into missions. And you want to make sure that people are actually qualified for what they're signing into the mission for. So that's important. Another feature is this blue arrow changes the person you're looking at. And this door looking thing opens up a pop-up that has a little bit more information. That includes professional development stuff, specialty track stuff, and email if you don't have their contact information. And you can actually send an email from this button here. All right. What is this? Oh, view qualifications. So this actually has a little bit more detail about when people were qualified, when they earned their qualifications, pilot, archer, CAP driver's license, and communications training. And so if you look at that view qualifications, you just get a little bit more clarifying information than what's just printed on the 101 card. SQTRs. And so right now, there's only Ops and ES SQTRs. I don't know if they will be doing the professional development SQTRs in there as well when those drop at the end of the summer, but we'll see. So Major DeBrose, let's see if he's Incident Commander level 1. No, he's not. So everyone has seen, everyone on here has probably seen the SQTR input screen. That's what we're looking at here. And a couple important things to note here. First is you don't need every field filled out on these qualifications. For the most part, you only need the date and the evaluator. Mission ID, specifically mission numbers generated out of WIMMERS, isn't required for most tasks. And what that tells you is you don't have to get a mission number to do training. You can do task-based training outside of missions. I'll say that one more time. You don't need a WIMR's mission number. You don't need WIMR's approval to do training. Just to make that very clear. If I wanted to look up an evaluator, let's say I was evaluating something, all right? I could look up an evaluator. I am not an SET for this task, for this rating, so it won't let me input myself for this rating. It's a check. But let's say I was signing someone off for a task or signing myself off for a task, and I put in their evaluator number. Once I submit that task down here at the bottom of the screen, then it's going to send it to that evaluator for approval. And that evaluator can check a box and say, yes, I actually did this training with this individual. And so people can't just put in random information. There's a check on that information.
Just before you start training, always check that the person conducting the training is an evaluator, or can, as we always, the old term was, can sign you off. Mm-hmm. I've had many cases where someone went to a training and there was no skills evaluator, and then they're like, well, I want to put somebody's number in there, and you need to make sure that when, whether you're scheduling the training or you're going to training that someone else has scheduled, that there are skills evaluators present for the tasks that you're working on. It's very, very important.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, if you are training with someone and they are not an evaluator, you can still do training. You just can't get signed off as having been evaluated. And we'll talk more about that when we talk about how training is organized. Multi-SQTR entry, and so I haven't used this in a while. Let's see. Let's say I need my general emergency services. What am I looking at here? Nope, don't know what this does. I don't know what multi-SQTR entry is. But that's okay. If somebody learns, let us know. Send me an email. All right, further down, once we get out of the emergency services, and all this stuff is mainly qualification and training management, right? Because that's our role as ES officers, or a huge part of it. Pilots, SUAS, balloon, glider, airplane, FAA requirements, mission pilots, they have their own menus here that we're not going to worry about right now because that's a little outside of our scope. But same as communications, your comm officers should be monitoring communications training. But CAPREG 35-6, awards and badges, all right, operations badges and awards, all right, those are something that we manage as ES officers. And so we would be reviewing people's qualifications, not really the flight qualifications, aircrew, maybe, that's an ES qualification. Observer is an ES qualification, but those pilot ratings are not. But emergency services qualification badges, ground team badges, incident commander badges, those are things that we monitor and manage and submit people for when they earn it. People can submit themselves for it, and then it would come up for approval. But we want to make sure that we are managing our program and supporting our people and making sure they get input for the things that they earn.
Something just to touch base on the pilot ratings, typically, or at least in Maryland, the eval, I'm trying to remember the exact phrase. So we have a Maryland Wing mission pilot evaluation officer who manages all of the pilot ratings. He takes care of who the evaluation pilots are, when all mission pilots are get their qualifications, things like that. So when I was the Wing ES officer, I had a very good relationship with the air evaluations officer because you do work hand in hand. He took care of making sure that the pilots had all of their qualifications as required, like I did for all ground and incident command positions. But we worked very, very closely and hand in hand and because we both had to report up to the wing operations officer, which ultimately then went right to the wing commander as to the the state of our ES force.
Awesome, thank you. So there's also the e-services reports feature. I have submitted a ticket report because for whatever reason on my version of Chrome, the member reports doesn't work properly. So we'll skip that for now, but on your own, under reports, look at member reports, look at OpsSquall's reports, and look at the information that can help you do your planning and build your program. All right, so here is Wimmers, and I don't know how many people here have ever used it, have ever input a mission. So I'm not going to save anything that I'm doing now. And Z, were you able to find out if you still have access to the sandbox?
So they do no longer have the sandbox. The email I got back was, I'd have to go find it, but basically they were saying, go ahead, that we could create a mission, just making sure we noted that it was for training only, and then send them the rec number, they would delete it out of the system.
Okay. So
it's kind of the same. If you go through this and just don't save anything, I think we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So if it is a training versus actual mission, and actual mission could be search and rescue, could be disaster relief, could be transport, could be photography, all sorts of stuff. A training mission would just be training our skills, either learning or evaluating or practicing the type of skills that we use. Requesting wing, there's lots of different wings, choose your own. The mission name is just a brief, not even as long as a description, just a brief indicator of what's going on with that mission. So for instance, if I wanted to do search and rescue training, or I did search and rescue training on the day after Thanksgiving, I put Black Friday training, and then in a description I put basic ground team member level 3 training for Oregon Wing personnel, whatever. So that's the difference between mission name and description. Mission name, very brief description, a little bit more detail. Scenario, a lot more detail. So in the mission scenario, you actually want to tell the approval authorities everything they need to know about what it is you're doing, because we are going to request a mission type. And if we're doing search and rescue, SAR training, where is it? Oh, did they take all the training out and now they have the checkbox? I think that must be what they did. So missing aircraft, missing person, general search and rescue, direction finding training, all these things are options. And so you're going to put that in there. Mission start date, mission end date. So a mission start date, let's say you're doing a 1 weekend training, right? And we're going to do a weekend training next weekend, and we're going to show up on Friday and we're going to leave on Sunday, right? Well, what if we get rained out? What if we want to have a backup date? Well, I'm going to open that mission up for 2 weeks, and that way I have all the way until the following week to accomplish that training. And that way I don't have to request a new mission on top of that. And typically, depending on how your wing does it, you wouldn't worry about this for most training. The funded training, if you have submitted for a budget for your training to pay for aircraft fuel and vehicle gas and other resources, whatever they may be, you definitely need something in Wimmers. If you're just doing a squadron SAR-X, you don't need to do all those things. You can put it in Wimmers just so it's tracked, but you don't need to do all those things. Customer agency, point of contact, email, and phone number. So I am a wing alerting officer. So I am an incident commander that gets forwarded calls to our wing emergency number. And if someone calls me and says, hey, we have a request, let's say it's the Multnomah County Sheriff's Department, I would put Multnomah County Sheriff's Department, I talked to Deputy Jones, here's Deputy Jones's email, here's Deputy Jones's phone number. All that would go in there. Oh, if it's training, the customer agency would be Civil Air Patrol, and you would put the incident commander's information there, or the DO, or the ES officer. Okay. That's some important stuff. Let's see.
There was a quick question about how do I become a skills evaluator, SET.
Oh, good question. You want to handle it?
Oh, okay. So there are exceptions, but once you have fully received a rating, let's just use a ground team level 3 as an example. I did all of my training, submitted all of my documentation, went through the entire system, and then I got my GTM3 qualification. In most cases, you have to wait 1 year before you can apply for and get approval to be a skills evaluator. There are exceptions. So if you were a ground team member in an outside organization and you can show evidence that the training that you have been doing for a year or more is equivalent to what CAP does, the wing can grant skills evaluator training, skills evaluator status. But for the most part, from the date that you receive your initial rating, it's 1 year before you can submit a request to become a skills evaluator.
And there's still a skills evaluator training course, right?
Yeah, but the online test is a very generic, simple 10-question exam. It's more geared towards, not geared towards any specific rating. It's geared towards how you teach people.
Right. Cool. All right. So I think that's all we need to. Well, actually, this is important. Real quick. 2 things. I need to select a mission. Select this. I want one that'll have stuff.
I'm sorry, I was looking to see what questions.
Sure.
Okay, so you're in a mission now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the comm log, and so or the unit log. What we want to do is make sure that if we are the incident commander, if we're in the planning section, if we're in the logistics section, we want to be keeping track of what's going on in the mission. You can do this on paper using an ICS form 214-214, or you can do it in this comm log. Either is acceptable. It just all has to be put into e-services at the end. But make sure that you are submitting the information, putting who's doing it, when you're submitting it, what it's for, notable activities. Documentation is huge, and this is the single biggest point of failure in emergency services inspections. When we get evaluated at compliance inspections at the wing level, every wing I think I've ever read a CI for sucks at documentation. Don't be that ES officer, right? Be better than that. Make sure you're training your people to use these logs to do good, high quality documentation so that people 3, 4, 5, 10 years from now can look back when CAP is getting sued and point to the log and say, nope, we have high quality trained personnel that know what they're doing, and we have good documentation of all the things they did. This is very important.
As related to that, if you want to hold where you're at, I don't know if there's any specific sorties in here. The other piece that I have seen people get hit on very hard is the debriefing sections of 104s and 109s, where there's just a lack of information, if in fact there's any information at all. So the debriefing section of the 109 for ground, the 104 for air is very important. Again, it's documentation. This is what the team did when they were tasked out into the field. So this is another piece that I've seen people get hit on pretty hard for.
Stan Eval. Frank, do you want to put that in the chat? What you were saying? I got a text message 10 minutes ago that I missed.
Yeah, real quick, there was a question about, how do we know who's in attendance? Teams actually documents the attendees. So if you want to make sure that we know who you are, so to speak, go ahead and submit a question or something that has your name in it. That I believe that the Teams as a service provides that documentation.
Yeah, and so for everyone's situational awareness, at the end of the 3-session series for the workshop, I'm going to have a quiz, and in that quiz, you're going to have your name, and you're going to have whether or not you attended live during the seminar or whether you watched it on video after. So I'll have all that information captured when you take that quiz too. All right, I think that's all we needed to hit on for that. Let's go back to our slides. Where's my shared window? Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, I can see the PowerPoint.
Okay. All right, so other websites you should take a look at. You don't have to do it now. FEMA independent study courses, training.fema.gov/is. Aviation weather, aviationweather.gov. Fire weather and avalanche, fireweatheravalanche.org. Real-time flight tracking, Flight Radar 24. Flooding forecast, water.weather.gov. And then all the training, I got to tell you, if you want to do how to start fires, how to do land navigation, how to, introducing people to the concepts involved in water survival, whatever, look for stuff on YouTube. There's tons of good information out there already. You don't have to reinvent anything. And now we're going to talk about GIS.
Yes, there was last week. There was some questions, excuse me, as related to one of my other roles in the GIS program. So again, it's a newly formed team at the national level, and there's the actual contact GIS@cap.gov. We have, as you see right there, that is a portal to our hub site where we have a bunch of information. Excuse me, and that's the link right there at the bottom of where it's right underneath where it says National Geographic Information Systems. So I initially got involved in this actually purely from the search and rescue perspective of we just don't have people in GIS that understand what we're trying to do in search and rescue. So this, if you could hold here for a second, this is what I call the more advanced analytics involved in search and rescue. This is an example of a missing Alzheimer's person. The top right, that center dot is where they went. That's the initial planning point. That is where they went missing from. Then you see 3 red rings extending out from there. That is statistical data. So we have top left, the digital elevation model. This is your contour. This is the height, high and low, and in this case, you see the low is 176 meters, the high is 284 meters. Not super hilly or mountainous, but a little bit hilly. In the center is cellular data. So each of those slices of pie, so to speak, are different cellular towers where the pings of the cell phone happen. So you'd like to look at where they intersect as your higher probability areas. The bottom left is what's called a dispersion angle. So if there was an eyewitness that said they saw the subject going in that direction. So statistical data says the green is the most likely travel, the yellow, and then the red, the progression outwards. The bottom right is statistical data of where people are located. So whether they're in a structure, whether they're in the woods, whether it's an open field. So this is all based on statistical data that comes out of it's a publication from Bob Kester on statistical data of missing persons and aircraft. So this is these are tools that a GIS person can run and take back to the incident command and say, this is what the models tell us we believe someone would do. These numbers come specifically out of that book. So this can be a great value as a search management team in saying, where am I going to send my search teams? Okay, so next slide, please. So another piece that we also do, and this is a public story map, as it's called. So that address there at the bottom left, this has information on CAP assets. The initial screen here, it's a little hard to see, but this shows all of our aircraft, radio stations, vehicles, all of those are posted there on the map. There's different tabs for earthquakes. If you were to go there and open that, you would see some information on the Puerto Rico earthquakes this past year. There would be information in the flooding, for flooding events that have happened. So this is we call this an operational situation dashboard that we keep update for the national commander so that he knows, the status of our organization on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So these are some other tools. One of the very common tools used for search and rescue, at least on the East Coast, is Sartopo. I'm not as familiar with the West Coast. Both of the maps are Sartopo maps. The bottom right is actually, see all of those red rings, that's an actual mission. Those are airborne reports of a 121.5. So every one of those rings is a different airplane that happened to be flying overhead and said, hey, I hear something. So the AFRCC, when our incident commander calls them, they'll say, okay, we'll send you this data. I can put that into a map and help to narrow down a search area. Now, as you see in this case, most of these planes were at a pretty high altitude, so that's a significant search area. That's almost the entire state of Maryland, southern Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, Virginia. So that's one of the challenges of airborne reports of the old distress beacons. The center there is just kind of showing different things. We have tools that can be used on the cell phone, tablets, computers, these different GIS tools that actually I'll show you here on the next slide. Go ahead, please. So this is the earthquake in Puerto Rico, and when that happened, FEMA had requested us, because we have squadrons in Puerto Rico, and FEMA did not have people sitting there waiting for earthquake to happen. So we created what's called a survey that's used on your cell phone, and our ground teams, after the earthquake was over, they went and did damage identification. So I do want to stress, a little sidebar, CAP does not do damage assessment, but we can take pictures of things that we see damage of, and USAR teams can go and assess that damage. That is a very, very specific trained task. So, but we could provide that information. The people at FEMA, this is near live. As soon as you hit the submit button on your phone, as long as the service is there, within 15 seconds pops up on the top left, and that was shared with the FEMA headquarters, and they can see, oh, look, there's a damaged structure here, there's a damaged structure there. They can see the level of damage and start planning for what kind of resources they would need to get down into Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. These are two other dashboards that we create, again, for the national commanders. The upper left is a health and welfare as related to COVID-19. So you can see 4,000 of our submissions of our squadrons have been reporting the status of their squadron. We do not go to the member level, just to the squadron level. So there's no specific person information in here. But at the time that this snapshot was taken, when I took this picture here, within Civil Air Patrol, we have 51 members who have been diagnosed as being positive for COVID-ID. So in the bottom right, you'll see that the left side is our aircraft. So at that time, we had 359 fully mission capable aircraft, 59 partially capable, and 176 that were not capable of going out on a mission. The bottom center is vehicles. How many trailers, how many cars, vans we have, pickup trucks, and then the total number of squadrons, which actually is up to about 1,700 now, I believe. And then the right side is all communications. So that is HF, UHF, VHF. So that is all. So these are nationwide numbers at that time. So that's only a few days old. So you can see that currently these are pretty fresh numbers for the status of our vehicles, our aircraft, and our communications capabilities. So that's another thing that we also provide for, the NOC that can go there and they can see, they can dive down into this and see specific to, an aircraft. You actually, if you click on, in here it won't work, but if I were to click on one of those dots, a window would pop up and give the very detailed information on that aircraft or that trailer or that radio station, whichever feature you were clicking on. And I believe there might, okay, that's the last. So that is, that's both the local and the national level GIS work I do. So for the national, these two dashboards here, as well as a couple of the other things. Locally, we use Sartopo, especially in the first operating period. We have found that, we can locate the subject within the first 6 hours. It's usually a successful mission. Subjects are not harmed or require minimal medical attention. So we usually use Sartopo for that. For the more advanced missions or more complicated missions, we'll use ArcGIS to run those analytics to say, hey, it's most likely that they would go in this direction or be found in this type of a structure and things like that. So that was how I got involved into the GIS, and they're currently building out the national team to, again, I had a personal conversation with the GIS director at FEMA just yesterday, and he is very pro Civil Air Patrol. They use us all the time for the imagery, for ground and air imagery, because we're all over the country. He does not have people all over the country. So when something happens, he's activating, he's putting in that request, using that procedure that was in that pamphlet to get Civil Air Patrol assets out in the field so that he can see what's happening as near real time as possible. So it's important that our force is strong enough to support that customer demand. So if we don't have people who know how to safely get in a vehicle, drive out to into an area that may have had a tornado or there was an earthquake or something happened like flooding, and be able to get some imagery and get that back into our system so that our customer can then make decisions on how they respond to that. So I might have got a little long-winded there, but that was sorry.
That was awesome. I'm stoked. I'm going to try to get on and play with some of these things too. For anyone who wants to look at these in more detail, if you go to the Girdwood Squadron website, you can download this presentation and use those links. That was the slide for taking a break, but we are running low on time, so we're going to press on. Use your own potty at your own discretion. So let's talk a little bit about how training works in CAP specifically. So components. So we have SQTRs. SQTRs are a checklist of the things you need to do to get signed off. But you cannot look at an SQTR and know what you need to do to get signed off, if that makes sense. There's task guides. Task guides are broken down into tasks. Tasks are discrete skills. And in the task guide, it has background information about that skill, the performance requirement, how you need to do it. You can also use it on a mission as a checklist if you need to. And then evaluation criteria. There are multiple steps, and you must pass each step in front of an evaluator to complete a task. You can then sign that task off in your SQTR. So you must use a task guide in front of an evaluator, personally complete all those steps, in order to get signed off. What you don't do is stand up at a squadron meeting, read a paragraph out of the task guide about how to manage a search line, and then say, okay, everybody go into eServices and sign yourself off for managing a search line. That is wrong, because if you did that, you did not look at the evaluation criteria, have every individual pass a step in front of an evaluator before they went and signed it off. So make sure that you were doing that. Your evaluator has to be qualified. We talked about SETs and how to get there. The evaluator should be different from the person providing the training and giving instruction. And the reason for that is what we don't want to do is get into a situation where one individual's bad habits are passed through the whole force. So the best practice is you have one person do the instruction, do the training, cadet, senior member, guest speaker, whatever, and then have a qualified evaluator evaluate the individuals who are in the class afterwards.
So
yeah.
Real quick, like you said, a guest speaker. So a good example, GTM3, would be hot and cold weather injuries. So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a nurse. I'm not an EMT. I frequently will reach out to a squadron and say, hey, do you have anybody in your squadron who might be part of a volunteer fire department who is an EMT, who's much more qualified in a specific topic like hot and cold weather injuries? Now, once they do the instruction, then it falls to, as the colonel just said, the evaluation criteria. That's where I would then step in, and each individual would have to come back to me and say, okay, there's a series of questions that are asked, and they would have to answer those questions to get signed off on hot and cold weather injuries. So that's a case where I did not do the actual training, and the person who actually did the training may not even be a member of Civil Air Patrol, but they are an expert in that subject, and that's okay. It's the piece that you have to make sure you do is that evaluation criteria with an SET.
Yeah, more than okay. That's great. You can have someone who manages search dogs come and talk about search dogs for that task. That's better than just getting up and saying, all right, everybody, get out your task guide and read about this, and then hopefully you'll remember not to get signed off. Do good training. Do great training. Have experts come in. That's good stuff. So in addition to SQTRs and task guides, we also have reference texts. Those have expanded and detailed information, chapters upon chapters of information about the topics that these tasks are based on. I honestly don't know that I've seen one in quite a while, so I'm hoping that they're up where I'm telling you to go. But most of these things, if not all of them, should be at nisa.cap.gov. nisa.cap.gov. That's where the National Emergency Services Academy posts all of our task-based training. All right, so we had a question about how to plan a training event. So where do you start? What you want to do is you want to talk to your members. You have this training plan, you have these objectives that you want to meet, these goals, they're SMART goals. By the end of the year, we want to get some ground teams. So talk to your members and see, well, who's available and when are you available to come do ground team training? Talk to neighboring units. We talked about integrating across echelons. Hey, we want to have this ground team training. What other squadrons want to come and do stuff? Who from the wing level wants to come and support? Identify what tasks you want to complete. And here's where I see a lot of points of failure is people say, oh, we're going to do some ground team training. Okay, show up with your ground team gear. But they haven't identified ahead of time what tasks they're going to do, what equipment they need to support that training and evaluation, who the SETs are going to be that know what they're talking about for those. And so people show up and you have some brand new members who have general ES, and you have some ground team 2s, and you have a ground team leader, and you have some UDF folks, and they're all there to do quote unquote ground team training, but they're all at different places. Identify what you're going to do ahead of time, publish it, let people know, hey, if you already have this signed off, this is what we're working on, but come and help train other people, come and be supportive, come and maybe we can squeeze in 1 or 2 other tasks for you, but that's not our priority. Have a plan on specifically what you're going to do ahead of time. Along with that plan, you need to identify who your cadre are, who's going to do the training, who's going to be leading it, evaluating it, where you're going to do it, what tools you need, if you're doing DF training, you need to make sure you have a practice beacon. You need to make sure you have DF equipment. You need to make sure you have batteries for the DF equipment. So think about where you're going to source all that stuff from. Have a plan. There are some great templates out there for written training plans, for weekend long, week long, different kinds of training activities. Find one, use it, steal it from somebody else, and get permission from a higher headquarters. You don't need permission from in all wings necessarily, but you might. And so know what the policies are in your wing. Make sure that your commander is on board. You definitely need your commander's approval to do any local training. And if you want to have any of it funded because you're going to go drive the van across the county to go do training and you need to pay for gas, make sure you either have a mission number with a SARX and WIMMERS, or that you have approval from your unit finance committee. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck paying for the gas yourself.
And some squadrons do some fundraising to cover small expenses. So if you need, $30, $40 for vehicle and a fuel to do a training exercise, a lot of times they are covered or can be covered by your own squadron if they do that fundraising. Back to just real quick, working with other squadrons, a lot of times one of the bigger things I hear is a squadron commander will call and say, we don't have a GTL. We don't have someone who's an SET. So that's where a lot of my work is hooking people up together. This squadron, okay, I know this squadron over here has 3 GTLs and a very big, robust, thriving ES program. And then I'll bring those 2 squadrons together. I'll get them talking to each other and working on some training with each other. So that's, again, part of that ES officer's job.
Awesome. So back to knowing what you're doing, knowing what you're talking about, having a plan. So you have tasks you want to cover. What tasks do people actually need? So go into OpsQuals, look at people's SQTRs, look at people's qualifications, run those reports and see what you need to work on. What instructors do you have? Do you have an instructor or an SET that can work on those things? Can you reach out to another unit or to your wing to get support? What other training has been done or will be done? Well, if you're going to do UDF training at your unit this weekend, maybe doesn't need to happen at the squadron down the road next weekend. Maybe do a little coordination. Study the task item reference text. You for sure want to make sure that your instructors and evaluators know the standard they are teaching to. And that's what the SET is all about. When you take that SET training, it's know the standard, train to the standard, don't add qualifications, don't take away requirements, make sure you hold the standard. Because we can do more training, we can learn above and beyond what our baseline qualification is, but we have to meet our baseline. Our incident commanders, our customers, our command teams at all echelons need to know when I tell them, hey, we have 2 ground teams being led by some ground team leaders and they're all ground team 1s. They know what that means. And so if you don't actually do land nav training because, well, it was on your curriculum, but you didn't go and get you didn't make sure everybody had a compass and didn't get the navigation points to actually do the evaluation, well, now you've made me a liar, right? So make sure you meet the standard. And don't overcommit. Training takes a long time. If you have 20 people that are trying to get signed off on a single task, you have to evaluate 20 individuals, right? It takes a while. So don't plan on knocking out an entire qualification like in one day. That's not realistic. You want to plan to actually accomplish something and accomplish it thoroughly. So building your cadre, how do you get a team to help you do that training? Talk to trained members within your unit. Attend group wing ES training to network. Talk to group wing ES staff for help. Ensure members are trained qualified for what you want to train. Account for cadet protection. We always have to remember we have to abide by all of CAP's rules all the time. And ask very nicely. I've heard of situations where people just expect and demand that the wing will magically conjure up evaluators for them, and that doesn't really work that way. We're all still bound by the core value of respect, right? So when you find a location, you have to think about whether you're doing land navigation training, or if you're doing DF training, or if you're doing tabletop first aid training or something like that. What kind of space are you going to require? Squadrons that have large footprints, squadrons that have big buildings that can hold classes or access to large spaces, like football fields at schools or something like that, you want to make sure that you are aware of whether or not you can do training there. Public parks and campgrounds. I love using public spaces. Public parks are great. We just want to make sure we let the authorities know, hey, if somebody calls and says that there's a militia out doing drills in the park, it's the Civil Air Patrol, and hey, don't worry about it. Members connections. So if you can get the hookup at a school or your conference room or whatever, that's valuable. Make sure you have permission for sure. You do not want to be besmirching CAP's good name by using a place without permission or otherwise trespassing. Making sure it's safe. Consider bathrooms, parking, access to food, shelter from weather, table space, sufficient open space for practical tasks. Like we were talking about, land navigation takes larger spaces and other stuff. And optics. Is it going to look correct for a bunch of people in camouflage to be roaming around in that area? Resources you need, task guides, if you need additional equipment, if you need litters for some litter carry training, if you need first aid equipment for first aid training, if you need DF equipment and your unit doesn't have any, talk to your wing, talk to other units, talk to the group. And if there are costs, if you need to buy new 9-volt batteries for the Elper, or if you need to buy new sniffer because you don't have DF equipment, talk to your unit, figure out if the unit can afford it, if you need to do a little fundraising amongst the people who are there, if you can charge, $5 or $10 a head for an activity and cover some of those costs. All those are reasonable things. What you don't want to do, to be clear though, is if you charge money for an activity, you cannot turn around, accept cash, and spend that cash without having deposited in the bank first. You have to do a request ahead of time for funds if you need to spend funds on the day of. If you accept money with one hand and then spend it with the other on the same day, you are committing fraud. It has to hit the books. Okay. So have a plan, build a schedule, and stick to it. Plan for breaks. Breaks take time. People need a chance to relax and incorporate their knowledge. Consider what to do if a lot of people show up or not many people show up. Plan meals. Is it more efficient to cater? And what's catering? It's going to Subway and getting a bunch of 6-inch subs, calling for pizza, something like that. It may be easier to do that than tell people to bring MREs or somebody forgot their lunch or something like that. Consider lodging if you're doing overnight training. That is a big addition to a training program if you're having overnight activities. But if it means that you can get people to bed at 10 p.m. and get them up at 6 and have breakfast and move on and do good training, that might be something you want to consider. And you need to make sure you are protecting your cadets there as well. And then do it. Do the plan. Stick to the plan as much as you can. Be flexible when you can't. The quote that I found was, "No plan of operations extends with certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's main strength." Or the plan never survives first contact with the enemy. Or Semper Gumby, right? We just do the best we can, and it usually works out pretty good because we're awesome. Make sure people get credit. So participation letters go in people's individual personnel records showing that they were there and they participated. They do that whether or not they get any tasks signed off, right? That's a requirement. That's actually in the CAP admin regs. SQTR updates get done if they complete requirements. And the member can update that, or the evaluator can update that, or you as the ES officer can update that. I like doing that input for people that come to my trainings. It's a service I like to provide to make sure people understand what's going on and they get the credit for what they do. And also have fun. This high quality search and rescue training exercises, things like that, are a huge component to member retention. And so what you're doing really matters for more than one reason. And finally, let's talk about tabletop exercises. So if you are all sitting around a map or a table and talking through missions, that's a tabletop exercise. It's useful in the middle of winter and people can't be going outside. If it's the end of the fiscal year and you don't have money for the van, for the gas, or some other limiting factor like, Corona. But tabletop exercises have a place and they're valuable. Take them seriously, right? Train harder than you expect to fight. If you're doing a tabletop exercise, give challenging questions to people that need to respond to them, right? Ask your ground team leader, all right, so here is your objective, show me the route you're going to plan, but by the way, this bridge is out and you can't take the highway because there's construction. What are you going to do? Put up stumbling blocks, let them work their way through it, because if they can do the hard stuff during training, it's going to make the actual mission easier. Incorporate new personnel. Tabletop exercises are a great opportunity for people that are maybe new to CAP or new to a role. They're new to being on a planning section. At a tabletop, you don't have a bunch of people standing around waiting to get out the door to go and do a ground sortie or an air sortie. So maybe having some new planning people helping with the planning stuff then, because you don't have all those other people waiting, adding pressure, might be a good thing. The stakes during tabletop exercises are lower, right? Because we're not burning avgas, because we're not increasing risk by putting people out in bad weather in the middle of the night. So take appropriate risks, all right? Have lofty goals, take on challenging scenarios and address them. And it's very useful to have a dedicated white cell. That white cell is people who come up with the scenario, come up with the objectives and the targets. They're going to have exercise injects throughout. Hey, you're going to go and search for this person with Alzheimer's in this neighborhood. Oh, now there's been a new sighting. They say an hour later, there's been a new sighting. There's a new clue. Here's the clue. How are you going to change your plan? And that whole time they're observing how people are responding to the information, and they're going to provide feedback at the end of the day. All right, so we talked about relationship management. We talked about tools and resources. We talked about training. Are there any questions in the chat that we need to address?
Yeah, actually, I was typing it, but I'll go ahead and address it here. There's a question. Texas Wing is looking for FEMA people with IS-26 qualifications. So there is no CAP qualification for that. One thing that you can do is when you go online and take any training, when you get your certificate from the online training course, if it's an online course, you can still upload those into your qualifications. You scan that certificate and upload it into your ops quals, into your personal qualifications list. So then you at least have that record. If a customer, in this case FEMA, it could be your local EMA, is asking for a specific IS certification, to show that you did take something that CAP doesn't have. So in that case, the best that we can do is you go on, you take your course, you print out a copy of that certificate so that you can show a customer that, yes, we have these people that completed this. But you will find that there are what I'll say ES qualifications that CAP does not participate in, and this being one in specific. And to be honest with you, the IS-26, I'd have to look up and see specifically what that covers, because there were many GIS ones I had to take to work down in Washington at the FEMA headquarters that have nothing to do with Civil Air Patrol. So I just went online, took the courses, provided that documentation to FEMA, and they said, okay. I kneeled and they blessed me with a sword on my shoulder, and I was allowed to go down there and sit in the coordination center during disasters. So I do highly recommend, if you take those courses, scan the certificates, load them up into OpsQual, so you have that record's there. And then you have that also to show any customer that is asking for something specific. Let me scroll down here a little bit.
I saw a question. Do people need to be individually assessed with criteria? In the example of a search line, if you simulate a search line with training, assume that the evaluator is watching the entire search line. Can they pass everyone off on the entire task? Do they need to have each individual student individually? Refer to the evaluation criteria for the individual task. Generally, every individual needs to be individually observed. Specifically with a search line, work as part of a search line. There's 4 different steps. In the course of doing a 15 or 20-minute search line down and back a couple times, which is fast for real life, but slow for training. In the course of that time, you can watch every individual do that training, but make sure you refer to the evaluation criteria. Does CAP require first aid CPR to be from Red Cross, or is Heart Association acceptable? It's actually more general than that. CAP doesn't require that you currently be certified by an organization in first aid. They require that you have had first aid training, and it has to meet, I think it's the Department of Transportation first aid standard that's published. So it's got to have some sort of basic first aid with a hands-on component, but you don't need to get a card at the end of it.
Yeah, the key there was years ago they had some issues with people doing some online first aid training that had no hands-on piece, and found that it was wholly inadequate. So having the hands-on part is really what they're looking for. So, and all of these organizations, they'll give you something that show that you attended a first aid course, and again, scan that, load it up into OPSQuals, and you'll have that. But you don't have to carry a wallet card as you did many years ago. And there was a question about pod training. Okay. Pod training, point of distribution. I'm sorry, point of distribution has become, at least on the East Coast, a thing, I guess I would call it, the last 2 years, especially after the last couple of hurricanes. They basically, EMA's asking for CAP assistance to help in literally handing out water bottles and MREs and things like that. So there are online pod training courses. I don't think it has made it into our qualifications, into what is something you would see on a 101 card, though. I'd have to look up, to be honest.
I thought it was, but I could be wrong.
It would not surprise me if it's not there, that it would be there in the very near future.
Where is the list of plans or lessons? If that is a list of, well, let me back up. There are PowerPoint decks with information for teaching various ES tasks on that NISA website. Specific lesson plans, you are going to have to do some legwork and reach out to other units or your wing staff or somebody else and see some training plans. There is not a single repository or list because it should be customized for local anyway. Somebody had a question about what is avgas. That's aviation fuel, avgas, aviation gas, fuel for planes. Will we get ES specialty track sign off by attending these OJT sessions? No. This is good, valuable information because I'm awesome and I like sharing information with people, but there is no requirement to attend a workshop and there is no specific task that we're covering to get signed off. Do you see any others, see?
I think that there was a lot about the pod, and it looks like somebody responded that it is on the 101 card. It is something that you can plug in and put in the 101 card. It's a subject, or it's a qualification I've chosen to stay away from. Just so many other things. You can only do so many things, so you have to make your decisions on what you're going to participate in.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody. I apologize. I tried to do this live event. I thought it would be a nice change after the situation last week, and we had some challenges this week too. I might change it up again for next week. It may not be a live event. It might just be a Teams meeting. But yeah, I appreciate you being here, and we will see you again next week. Any parting thoughts, Z?
No, just thank you, everyone. Thanks for having some patience. You know, everybody is learning how to do these things virtually. You know, so this is the first attempt at using the Teams live event. It is a little bit strange in the, you have no audio, so submitting the questions. So I was trying to go through and ask them to the group as they came up. I hope everyone's questions were answered. Thank you for having patience. And that's about it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.